All right, everybody, welcome into the Fifth Dimension podcast. For today's show, I was joined by Laura Faye. She is a galactic channeler, starseed, and New Earth Ascension guide. Laura and I have had many podcasts before in the past. Happy that she has rejoined the show and really had a fantastic conversation. I hope you guys enjoy this one as much as I did. So much to unpack, sit with, meditate on, and a lot to learn as we enter this age of Aquarius. So, if you're a fan of the show, be sure to subscribe whatever platform you are on. You can also head over to my Substack, mcdermott.substack.com. Never miss out on a podcast, newsletter, poem, whatever it may be. All over on the Substack, McDermott, McDermott.substack.com. You can also book a one-on-one tarot reading with me. I know a lot of Laura's audience in particular might be interested in this. Live on Zoom, or you can get a written tarot report, and we dive deep on whatever it is that you are feeling called to explore, and we can unpack that together. Been doing tarot almost 10 years now. Truly a life map for me in terms of my own personal understanding. But the links to do that in the episode show notes below. Be sure to purchase a copy of my latest poetry book, The Final Judgement, available now on Amazon. Episode show notes below. You can just type in The Final Judgement, Evan McDermott. It'll pop right up there for you, baby. And hit me up on those socials, Instagram, X, TikTok. We got them all in the episode show notes. Special thank you to our one and only official sponsor, Tranquil Desires, here in Chamberlain, South Dakota, your one-stop shop for all your holistic health and wellness needs. If you're ever in South Dakota, come on by. Say Evan from the Fifth Dimension sent you. The link to their Facebook page is in the episode show notes. And even if you're not around local, give them a like, support. They have made a lot of things possible for this show. A special thank you to Patty for being like a mother to me and showing lots of love and appreciation for what we're putting out. And that'll wrap up my little spiel here. I know y'all are here for the conversation, not so much for my little ad blurb and intro. So let's jump into the podcast with Laura Faye. Enjoy. All right, everybody, welcome into the Fifth Dimension podcast. I am joined once again by Laura Faye. Been a little while since the last chat. Um, we've been sitting here talking for a while, and we realized we weren't recording the podcast, and we have been already delving in. So, Laura, it's such a pleasure to have you on the show and be able to chat again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And it's wonderful to be back. We have a lot to catch up on.
Absolutely, absolutely. Everything has changed, yet nothing has changed, and here we are,
Exactly.
diving right back into it, which is the beauty. Um, so Laura, we're here at the end of 2024, and as we are kind of talking about, if something you just mentioned maybe would be a good thing to kind of dive right into, because I'm very interested to hear more about what you were about to say on it. You just mentioned psychic development and the sort of um, I would say growing ability. I've noticed for myself, my level of being in tune with that side of myself has, even if I don't sit and necessarily consciously work on it every day. I mean, I do my meditations and things like that. It just feels like my intuitive and psychic abilities have been really growing this year in particular, and just the ability to hone in on that. And I've noticed, we were talking a little bit earlier, like the people I'm conversing with in my own town and in the community, the level of questioning is going up. That's the spiritual undertones in specific conversations is heightening. I'm sort of noticing all these things, right? So, uh, what do you think about you could we could speak to the end. It's easier to speak to the individual, of course, but collectively, is psychic development of all of us, and what's coming in for you when we're looking at psychic development in the current day.
It's really interesting what you're saying because I feel like divine masculine, especially, is becoming more psychic because it feels like the heart chakras have been opened for a lot of masculine energy. When I talk about psychic development too, it feels like in order for you to be very tapped in, getting messages, trusting your intuition. All of your upper chakras have to be on. They have to
Mhm.
be turned on. They have to be activated. And most people are only operating on the lower chakras. So what we're doing with this shift into fifth dimension, shift into higher energies and frequencies, is we're starting to activate the upper chakras and turn them on so that we can be more intuitive, so that we can read energy, so that we can have precognition, so that we can have clairaudience, clairvoyance, and all of these things. Because that's actually what I feel like are supernatural abilities, meaning they're very natural to us
Mhm.
if we were operating on all cylinders, in other words.
Mhm.
So it feels like because Divine Feminine has been rising so strongly, Divine Feminine energy has affected Divine Masculine energy. And it's like I do a lot of messages for 144,000 for the wave, the frequency, whether it's an actual number or a frequency
Mhm.
is not really the point, but it's like our wave may not even know how much your energy is affecting everyone you interact with. So when you say that you interact with people and they're becoming more aware of this, I feel like it's a reflection of you being aware of it. Because I'm in this I get this message a lot that we're in our own simulation, we're in our own world. You're the main character in your world. So if you're psychic, you're probably going to attract a lot of other people around you who are reflecting that back to you. So it would appear that everyone is becoming more awake and attuned, but that's like a reflection of your own attunement getting stronger and
Mhm.
more contagious.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it goes to show you we do create our own reality in that way. We are the divine creators. And so, and this is something we were talking about before we hopped on too. Like if you're kind of, I think a few years ago, it was easier to kind of bring myself down to, and this is not to say that I'm above people or people are lower than me. This is all frequency per se. I would bring myself down to say, let's somebody who's living out of their root chakra and they're kind of in fight or flight survival mode all the time. It would be much easier for me a few years ago to feel that and almost bring myself to that level to meet them there and be and not necessarily um and you could say maybe I'm cutting off my own authenticity or that's maybe I'm not supposed to go down to that level, right? But now for me it feels like the if I see somebody in that state, it's more of a okay, I'm going to bring myself to a place of empathy and feel that and recognize it, but I'm not going to channel out or cut off my own psychic abilities per se. And doing that, like you mentioned, I feel like that's how we actually kind of plant these seeds of awakening in a lot of ways, right? And we actually teach and demonstrate and say, hey, this energy is available too. Let me gift some to you and let me plant these seeds so you can awaken, right? And show you love and compassion from the heart. And because I think once you get that little dose of unconditional love, it really takes you out of that fight or flight survival mode almost instantly because you recognize, oh, a lot of these survival needs that I'm worried about, I'm actually fine. I'm actually all right. I don't need to be in the root chakra right now. We're good.
And that's the matrix programming, a lot of it that is dissolving, and
Mm,
the lack mindset and the victim mindsets that have been programmed in so deep to people, because they're trusting the matrix and they're not trusting the universe and they're not
mm,
trusting that we live in an abundant universe and source. That's We're connected to source. We're connected outside of the matrix. We're connected to something bigger, and I feel like a lot of the root chakra fixation or being in a lack mindset or survival mode is because we are fundamentally a spiritually deficit society and
mm,
people have no spiritual connection. And I'm not talking about religion, but a actual spiritual connection to something beyond like um, the Native Americans or used to know when they were born that they came in with six spirit guides that were constantly with them their whole life. And so we have lost that. And I
Hmm.
feel like we're getting that back. And because when you have a knowledge of having spirit guides, for example, or being connected to something beyond, um, it gives you a sense of ease and trust and peace. And you can operate with an unconditionally loving presence because you just operate differently. Our
Definitely. And
operating system that we've tapped into that
right,
helps people out of um the matrix is what it is.
right, for sure. And you know what's interesting is that this idea of the Matrix is becoming, I mean, you could say it's been, I don't want to say it's mainstream necessarily, but now we're even seeing in specific political circles like the word being thrown around. Like if anything, it's kind of a mainstream talking point for certain groups. But I almost wonder if that is in itself an extension of the Matrix programming to limit the constructs of what the Matrix is, right? Because there's a lot of people nowadays who are very aware about, let's say, the lower astral realms or sort of the dark demonic presences and spirits that are very real, right? But um, people don't recognize that full spiritual hierarchy of the fact that we do have spirit guides and there are, the archangels are very real in the purest sense, right? And we have a direct connection with them that we can tap into and tune into and find within ourselves first and foremost, right? And so sometimes I almost wonder if this obsession, there seems to be an obsession with pointing out the darkness and exiting the matrix by solely fighting the darkness and the forces of evil. And I don't, it's tough because it's obviously it's important to know about these things and it's important to have an understanding that there is a lower astral realm and there are demonic presences that are very real. Yet in the same sense, if we don't have that higher connection that you're talking about, then we're sort of bound to be trapped within that lower astral
Right.
while we're talking about fighting the matrix, we're actually really perpetuating and reinforcing its stranglehold on us in a lot of ways. But I mean, is it possible too that maybe that conversation that's taking place in certain mainstream circles is that like the beginning of an awakening process to the bigger picture, right? You can kind of look at it both ways.
Well, it feels that way. It's like the meme where you've got Neo waking up in the pod only to go into another false matrix. It's like
Hmm.
you woke up from the matrix only to go into another matrix
Mm.
because it does feel like there is a fixation um on truth. There's a fixation on red pill. There's like a fixation on knowing what the darkness has done on the earth. And that's a stage of awakening. I mean, I felt like I want to say it was 2017 for me personally when I started going down rabbit holes
Mm.
and being really into conspiracy theories and all of that. And it really took another 3 years, I guess, before I shifted into what really ignited my awakening was the Kundalini activation. And I shifted out of that because it was heavy. I mean, it's heavy to stay in that loop without having a way out because it is a rabbit hole. It does feel like there's no end, and you can
Hmm.
keep going and going and going in circles with all of the information about what we've learned or what is out here and what's in the fourth dimension and really what's been going on in the 3D, what's been going on the earth. I was about to use a really dramatic example, but I don't know if you're gonna put this on YouTube. I won't use that
Well,
example.
I was
Okay.
YouTube's been pretty good to me lately. Even I've been putting up some.
Oh, good.
So,
Okay.
you can give your dramatic example, and if YouTube takes it down, I can take a strike on my channel. I'm not on
Well,
the
it wouldn't
brink of
be
elimination.
it wouldn't be the first time they took a video down of me of mine. So I'm careful, but no, the hunting parties, I was gonna say, is
Mhm,
something that I feel like when I got to that, and I'll just say that hunting parties, and if you know,
mhm,
you know.
mhm,
That but I got to that and I was kind of like, okay, I can't really go any further into this because this is like breaking my psyche. It's
mhm,
so and so you have to, but I feel like, and I use that for a reason, when you know how where we are darkest, you could say, you are going to be able to hold more light. That's kind of how it balances. So you don't want to not look at that, or you don't want to be, I find a lot of people can't go there. I find a lot of humans don't believe it, can't go into the depths of, the underworld where we actually go as a species on the earth, um, because they just can't hold it in their psyche and in their awareness. That's also telling me they can't hold light
mhm,
either. So you're staying in this frequency where you're not letting all the truth in. So you wouldn't be able to really access deep truths if you're not able to look at everything. And when I say everything, it can be also what you were saying with the archangels being present and the Pleiadians being present and the interdimensional beings with the dragons, with the fairies. There really is no limitation to all the beings that actually truly exist.
mhm,
Um, but in both ways. So, you got to look at the archons, you got to look at the demons, but also it's all connected to be able to hold all of that information. And I feel like a lot of the ones on this wave are holding a lot of information, and it's a lot in your vessel
mhm,
to hold that. Um, and there's a feeling of being grounded, and not let it, in a way, go back to the everyday tasks of the day to ground yourself, like do your laundry, wash the
mhm.
dishes, have a routine, make your bed, and just do basic things because that's going to help you not maybe lose yourself in all of this information that's awakening us.
Definitely. And I would say a similar journey in a sense to where I remember reading and I was digging into the same type of truth information, whether it's hunting parties or some of the other deeply disturbing truths that are out there, right? And I remember reading a it was a Rudolf Steiner lecture about he was talking about there was a fall of the spirits of darkness, right? And I kind of look back on my own journey a little bit after reading that because I wasn't as in tune with a lot of the archangels and the higher beings. It almost felt like I was being to use the word hunted, it almost felt like I was being hunted by these like lower presences and like you can say fallen spirits because I was only in tune with their frequency and looking into that stuff. And I wanted to, I was aware of a lot of spiritual ideas and wanted to live in a higher vibration and change my consciousness but I don't think I was necessarily practicing it and connecting with these beings as much as I was looking into this sort of darkness. It almost felt like my life would be chaotic because I was in alignment with that and because that's what I was seeking the truth on because I thought it was so important to know the darkness and you know and that's that cliche saying of if you gaze into the darkness long enough you become it. It really was starting to become true because my life was so chaotic and I'm like, oh my goodness, what is going on? but
The
it,
abyss is
yeah.
like some quote about staring into the abyss and it stares back at you.
Hmm.
There was a phase where I was definitely looking outside my peephole in my door, expecting the men in black to come in anytime.
Mm.
So
Yep.
I know what you mean. I mean, there's a moment where also I've had clients, I've had people who will know that there's helicopters, like reptilian um, technology spying on them. There's a sense of that, and it can trap you in another false matrix reality because when you open the door into the rabbit holes and the truth, it wants to keep you there, because they're feeding on your vibration and energy. I feel like the fact that you can even look at it at all means, in a paradoxical way, you're a very high vibrational person. So
Mm.
your energy is a very attractive food source to those beings. So they want to keep you in a heightened state of fear. I'm seeing like a bee, because bees are attracted to fear. So they'll sting you if you are afraid of them, but they'll leave you
Mm.
alone if
Right.
you don't.
You
But
know,
yeah, that's the feeling I get. So, right. And I feel like I'm getting this message, it feels like Pleiadian message, but it's like the higher beings that you're connected to won't let you stay in that frequency. They're going to be fighting for you. They're going to be in the astral battling for you to wake up to a higher level of consciousness so that you don't get succumbed into fear.
hmm
So yeah, it feels like that's what I'm getting, a divine intervention feeling from your spirit guides and the angels and the ETs if you're connected to them. Whoever you're connected to, a lot of people are connected to elementals, to fairies, and it's like whatever is your genuine pure essence to connect to start to connect to those beings instead,
hmm
to pull yourself out of fear.
Right, definitely. And you know what's interesting is y- you're right that they don't let you, I would say, succumb to the darkness, and they're going to pull you out of it. Because the second that I ask to connect to them and to show up and to even like in a physical sense to make their presence felt, that like you have almost immediate like reciprocity of that, like, oh yeah, I'm here, where I didn't go nowhere. Right, I've always been here, just look up, look up in the sky, a good example. Like, do a lot of stargazing now out here in South Dakota, and anytime, a good method for me that I learned was, and you can look at, but I don't know how I feel fully about all of his work, but Dr. Stephen Greer does a lot of stuff with like connecting to beings from, other, I would call them other realms, through his method CE5, right? And you go out and you call upon uh, whoever, whoever's out there. But you can make it a very personal. Like, I'm calling on my spirit guides. I'm calling on the ETs to show up here and to connect. And you get that immediate like, oh wow, there they are. And you can get. We've had groups of like 10 to 15 people going out there, and we're doing this work, and everybody's like, oh my God, look at that. And I'm at the point now where I'm like, yeah, it's no big deal. They're always up there now. Um, but you can get that
Well, it's a
immediate.
cosmic connection.
Hmm
Yeah. It reminds me of the ancient Egyptians doing the work where they would connect to the stars and connect to cosmic frequencies and cosmic messages and do a lot of um, connection in that way, where we
hmm
have to be more connected to star systems. I mean, as star seeds in general, that feels like it resonates the most as work to do. Some people like sun gazing as well. If you're
hmm
more connected to the sun or the moon, I find really it's unique to the person, but I feel feminine energy would connect more with stars. Masculine energy may connect more with the sun, but going to the celestial objects, the sun
Right.
or the moon, feel very helpful as well.
Right. Definitely. And, I've done my fair share of both of those, the sun gazing and then stargazing and sitting underneath the moon by a river. There's nothing more beautiful than that. And it's interesting, Laura. I think I mentioned it to you when we were initially mentioned or messaging about doing another podcast. But we had the something, and it wasn't a big headline, right? If people miss this, then I guess it's no big deal. I don't know if it even made like most mainstream news, but I remember there was an article a couple weeks ago about Joe Rogan believing in dragons, right? Or something. They wanted to discredit Joe Rogan because they said he was a dragon believer, and you were the first person I thought of because I'm like, wow, Laura's been talking about dragons forever, and here we are, a mainstream talking head pundit talking about dragons. And Joe Rogan ran with the joke, and his his Twitter bio is still Dragon Believer. I think I looked on there. He still has that up. Um, but to me, and especially putting it into the context of what we've already talked about, right? It feels like, when even though somebody could look at that and just, call it a joke, whatever it is, the fact that that's even entering the conversation, the dragons, it's
Yeah.
like, we're we're starting to really talk about the higher frequencies. We're talking about higher beings. I mean, when you heard that, and we see this in sort of mainstream talking points, what does that mean to you? And when we're talking about dragons, I think people generally, and this was me for a long time, you just sort of have the almost mythological perspective on dragons, right? And you could there, but there's a reason they've been in every culture across time, showing up again and again and again and again. And I don't think there's a I guess a creature that man has a more like fascination with than that of dragons, right? So, what I know you just mentioned dragons. So when we see something like that, what does that mean to you? And what is, how is that entering the picture here?
It's very interesting because I think what I read from him posting that was that he was afraid of the dragons, or there was a negative connotation to what he was doing and talking about with dragons, which is why I wanted to um set him straight a little bit about that they're not actually reptilian
Hmm.
energies, but he was kind of approaching it like, be afraid of them. There are
Hmm.
these beings that are very powerful and they could destroy us and all of this. That's the feeling I got. I'm not sure if he directly said that,
Hmm.
but it feels like it's being introduced in the wrong context, because I feel like the dragons are returned in our collective consciousness because we're awakening and opening the heart, because we're becoming more psychic, because we're remembering who we are. I do feel like I've always said this. I've said this for a long time, that the dinosaurs were actually dragons.
Hmm.
Um, that's we've changed it and shifted it into dinosaurs, but they were actually the dragons, and that the Great Wall of China was built to keep out the dragons. That there's a lot of it's actually even an animal in the Chinese zodiac that you could say is the only mythological creature, but it isn't, because they're all real creatures. So there's this sense that we're moving from dragons being mythological to them being real, and that's all the beings that feel like mythological beings, the elves, the gnomes, the fairies, all the Lord of the Rings characters, the giants. There's no limit to the beings that we call imaginary and the beings that are real. They're all real. And I feel like that's a wall that we have to break through. And as soon as you believe that there are dragons, there will be dragons. And
Hmm.
that's pretty much, as in a nutshell, how simple it is to connect to them, because we'll see them in the clouds, we'll see them and we'll sense them. Like I can sense dragons, like you sense Pleiadians, like you sense angels, like you sense, it's like they all exist. They're just in a frequency where we can't see them, but we sense them and feel them. And so
Hmm.
there really is, you know, it's like we are just being upgraded in our humanity to where we used to be able to see them. Because again, we have devolved. People think we've evolved. We have devolved. We are
Hmm.
not as evolved as we used to be as a species. And so once we actually start to evolve in this way, we'll connect back to the beings that we can't see, but we know are there. And the dragons feel like they're coming back into our collective consciousness because um, for whatever reason, it's funny. I was getting a lot of messages from the extraterrestrials 4 or 5 years ago, and I would say maybe 2 years ago it shifted to the elementals, because I realized, and what they told me was like, because they're more connected to the earth realm, we're going to connect the dragons and the fairies before we connect to the extraterrestrials. And so the dragons are first.
Hmm.
And Joe Rogan, being a dragon believer in his distorted way, it's still a step in the right direction.
Right, definitely. Well, and you know what's interesting to kind of build on the programming you were just talking about how that you could say that article in Joe Rogan with the distortion, and I think Joe Rogan is a this is in my personal opinion, and any Joe Rogan listeners here, I apologize. I think generally a lot of what he's putting out tends to have a little bit of distortion within it. I mean, but it's for a higher purpose, you know, there's levels of truth that he brings to the table. Um, but you could say that programming we're looking at with that one specific example, if you look at all the movies over the last 50 years and you look at the Hollywood portrayals, you look at like let's say a Game of Thrones, right? Um, the concept of dragons has always been that of a destructive force. Like the towns run in fear when they see a dragon because it's going to burn the whole city down, right? You watch Game of Thrones, spoiler alert, it burns down King's Landing, right? At the force of a dragon, everybody in the city dies. It's this horrible destructive force, and people, you know, they're running in fear. And so I think that programming that you talked about, you know, that's those seeds were planted long ago because of this inevitable shift in our collective consciousness, right? If we attach a label of fear to something, well, then we're going to inevitably hold on to that. And so the seeds have been planted for so long that I think a lot of people, that's just the natural instinctual, well, maybe not instinctual, but that's the natural programmed response to the idea of a dragon. It's that of a destructive force, you know? It's not, so, I mean, how would you reframe it to connect on a more like higher dimensional level? Like, what are the real qualities of dragons, but also the other higher beings, right? That, and the reason that they are living in a frequency that we cannot necessarily um, I would say, comprehend on the day to day, just in living in the 3D.
Yeah, that's the feeling to me is they're actually a creative force.
Mm.
Um, and so we've got it inverted, which is not surprising that
Right.
both thing, and it's the first thing that people usually comment whenever I post about the dragons. It's like inevitably someone says, aren't they reptilians? Like go into a negative thing about them. But no, it's they're actually a creative force. So they're creating the earth. Like the message I got really strong when they first started coming in was that the dragons actually created the earth and are holding it up on all like four corners, you could say. There's dragons posted at all corners of the earth holding it together. And so that's the vision I get when I connect to them, is that they created, but in order to create, you also have to destroy. So I feel like that's why we have got this inverted um, thing in our head about that dragons are destroying and not creating, because we have to make this the switch. That's the switch from 3D to 5D, is seeing them as a creative force and not a destructive force. So when you can see that, you will have shifted yourself into a more fifth dimensional frequency.
Mm-hmm.
Because the third dimension frequency is to skew everything in a negative way.
Right.
And then you asked about how or why we don't connect to all the beings visibly because we can't see them. I feel like um, I feel like a lot of it is what I'm hearing from the Pleiadians is that it would actually scare you
Hmm.
because, and they don't want to scare you. So it would disrupt your frequency in such a profound way because we're not in alignment to them fully, that you would go into shock or you would have something really probably detrimental happen to you physically. And so not that they don't, but they can't show themselves for that reason, because if you're not in frequency alignment, it would overwhelm your psyche. So it's like, I feel a good example of this would be UFOs and
Mm-hmm.
how people feel like they're seeing UFOs. Well, you're seeing what looks like a flying object in the sky. because that's what your brain can make sense of. What you're actually seeing from a higher perspective, if they're coming from the eighth dimension, if they're coming from like an Arcturian ship in the ninth dimension, is actually a shape and it's something we can't comprehend because we're not ninth dimensional beings. So we make sense of it from a third dimension perspective, which is, oh, it looks like a plane in the sky. But what it actually is from a ninth dimensional perspective is something totally different that we can't comprehend. So
Mm.
that's the thing. And I feel like when we go down, this is like a rabbit hole in the other direction,
Yeah.
but it's this feeling like you can go into any level of dimensional consciousness and not know fully the answer that you're wanting to have. And it's this feeling of at some point you have to be comfortable just not knowing
Mm.
everything
Right.
because we can't.
Right. And that's the beauty of it, embracing the unknown, embracing the elements of mystery, because that is what gives life meaning in a sense, to have these discoveries and have these joys, but know that there's a higher force that, it doesn't need to show up in the 3D realm as a, wow, here's a physical being right in front of me that I can shake its hand and, make this beautiful pact or whatever. We want everything to have this sort of third dimensional, concrete, like material, finite. It's right here, when the reality is we don't exist in that type of realm ourselves, right? We are much more than just 3D material beings. And when we connect to that aspect of ourselves and we start connecting to the higher dimensions of who we are, that's when that comprehension begins to come in on a much deeper level. And, I think it's beautiful because I've had instances over the last couple of years where you have these, like, even with other people around you, like almost like moments of telepathy or moments of like psychic communication, right? Me and my closest friend here in South Dakota, who I've had on the podcast a few times, like we've been able to do that multiple times where we're both in tune. I've had I remember I was sitting at a park one day and often like a little secluded little spot, like a little meditation spot, it's very difficult to actually even find. And I said, if you need to find me, I am here. Like I had that thought in my head. Because I'm like, I have a feeling that he's looking for me. If you need to find me, I'm here. Within 15 minutes, he finds me in that spot. And he's like,
Wow,
I just knew to come here and find you. I was looking for you. And it
that's
was just like,
wild.
yeah, just a little like, okay. But it didn't surprise either of us at that point. Because it's like, yeah, we're at that point where we can communicate like that, right? So you
And
start,
it's like
yeah.
animals who get lost and miles away from their home, but they know how to get back home because it's the psychic energy. So
Mm.
it's really like that is starting to take a hold of humans,
Mhm.
like what just happened with you. That's so interesting.
Right. Yeah, and I think it goes to show you the capacity for our potential is really infinite in that way, right? Like if we start honing in on psychic development, we can really unlock a lot of these psychic gifts that we have of something like telepathy with one another. Um, and I think it speaks to our vast interconnectedness as a species too, that we are all interconnected through this psychic phenomena that exists between us, right? And I think the internet, for example, is a good, you could call it an inversion maybe, but it's like a physical representation. Here we are, you're down in Florida, I'm up in South Dakota. Here we are having a, obviously you're portrayed as pixels on a screen, but there's still a direct line of communication, right? And it's like, well, we could probably already do that telepathically in a sense if we honed in on that, right?
That's true. And that also feels like the X-Men energy starting to be what we're moving into. Because I feel like I've always connected with X-Men as of all the supernatural movies the most, because
Mm.
that feels like the most probable thing is that that or phenomenon is that you're going to find your own divine gifts, which might feel like an X-Men type of ability. and share that with the world. And then you're going to be seen as gifted, but also people will be possibly afraid of you because I get that. But to continue to lean into your gifts that are psychic, that are telepathic, that are whatever they are, I feel like the incoming starseed children will be able to do telekinesis. And I feel like that's something that is going to get probably in the next 50 years more common because they're going to start to be born in this Pluto and Aquarius era. And they're going to have a lot of abilities that I feel are going to be like the children in the Matrix, bending spoons and moving objects with your mind and whatever they're going to be able to do. But that feels like the timeline that I see unfolding is the X-Men, and then also possibly literally having special schools for the psychic children because we cannot continue to label them as crazy or have some mental illness. And if they start actually moving objects with their mind, I don't know what mental illness that could possibly be. That's not going to be explainable. But right now, what I feel like is happening with the very gifted children, a lot of it is that the parents aren't equipped to handle what's going on with them, and they're actually responding to energy. They're not responding to words. And I feel this very strongly because as a psychic person, I was always and still do, I respond to energy. I don't respond to words. So a lot of times I will overreact or look like I'm overreacting or look like I'm reacting in a way that's not appropriate to the situation because I'm reacting to the energy. And the person themselves may not even know what energy is working through them that I'm responding to. So it feels like we're already at this place of understanding that, because I've actually met a lot of parents doing this work who have psychic children and they didn't realize it. And like we figured that out, just talking about what the child was doing. And a lot of them, I mean, in a couple cases, they actually stopped giving them to therapists. They stopped because they realized what it was. They realized, oh, this is just my child is tapped in. So anyway, that feels like a very prominent phenomenon that's going to get bigger as we go.
And I definitely agree with you. And I was going to ask you about Pluto being in Aquarius because we just entered that as of 2 weeks ago, I believe, 2 or 3 weeks ago at this point. So the new age is here in that regard. And you know, it's interesting because it's very, I did a podcast a couple weeks ago and I've had ongoing conversations about things like AI, artificial intelligence. And to me, that feels like the inversion of what you just talked about, where we have this era where we're moving into, Pluto's now in Aquarius. It's very much like a development of mind and a development of the psychic abilities in a lot of ways. And I think what artificial intelligence is doing, and it's just mimicking exactly what you just described. And so we're going to have almost this parallel societies coexisting, you could argue, with one another, again, next to one another. I don't necessarily know what the organization is going to be, but you have an AI that's inverted and kind of trapping people within and outsourcing psychic development to machine and to technology. And I think there will be people who are caught in 3D that choose to go into like a man-machine merger type of deal. And, you could look at that and say, oh my goodness, it's a robot dystopia and Armageddon in that sense. There's so much movies, predictive programming that have that. But I don't necessarily think we're going to get to that point because of how many people who are spiritually awakening to their psychic abilities, like you just talked about, recognizing the gifts that already live within them to where we don't need to connect ourselves to a machine to have this. I think the promise of machines is that it gives us these abilities that we would describe as psychic phenomena, right? They're promising those. And yet, if we already find them within ourselves, it makes the need for those things completely null and void. Like, oh, what do I need to connect myself to a machine for? I already have all the gifts within. I'm already divine, whole, and psychically gifted. let's take that path, right? And I think that's maybe why there's so much labeling, and then the Matrix actually really does their best to attach a stigma to that type of even personal inquiry, because and labeling it a mental illness. Oh, you need to take psychiatric medication. Oh, you need, like you. But if I'm bending a spoon with my mind, or I'm moving an object across the room with my mind, you're right. Like if if we're calling that a mental illness, I guess sure, because I have a mental illness, fine. I don't care at that point.
Well, and you literally moved a person to come to you.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, you're already doing it. Right. It's funny. I feel like that's the false, you could call it the false spiritual matrix that has been as a development of the 2020 ascension choice point of taking the shot or not. And
Mm-hmm.
so, because I was seeing black goo as you were talking, which is not something I love to see, but because when you have black goo inside of you, which they're probably in the robots, it's probably a factor. But they're in the phones. It's in the machines already, the machines that we use. And black goo is a psychic substance that basically reads you. That's how the algorithms read you and know what to put in your face because they know you. And it's like the AI, the robots are going to do the same thing. They're just going to start to mirror you. So you will feel like you are seen. You'll feel like you're understood. You'll feel like, it's basically like doing a reading with a psychic.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it's just they're replacing that with the machines, and they're replacing it with the algorithms and everything on social media. Um, right. And so for the ones of us that were lucky enough to escape that false matrix, that was basically, it was like a metaverse. It's like if you've seen Ready Player One, that movie, I feel like that
Yep.
was a very apt depiction of what they're doing ultimately, which is trying to put goggles on you and put you in like a doubled down version of the Matrix. We're already in one, and then you want to put goggles on and go into another one. It boggles my mind. I don't know why anybody would want that, but it's going to happen because you're seeing like Google glasses and Apple glasses, and it's going to be basically how we answer the phone is it's going to come through your goggles. So maintaining your ability to be divine at this like heightened point in our evolution, you could say de-evolution, whatever it is going to be difficult because it was easier in 2020 to wake up than it is now.
Mm-hmm.
So really, I feel like we're on this rescue mission now, the ones of us who are maintaining divine frequency to help others who may start to awaken at this point. But they're doing everything they can, I feel, with the robots and all of this to prevent that from happening. The
Mm-hmm.
ones who could still wake up, it's going to be much harder
Right.
now.
And even the terms, excuse me, even the terms like wake up and awakening themselves have been, like we were talking about earlier, have been sort of those terms have been brought into the mainstream to talk about red pilling and to talk about, the truth movement and all of these different ideas, so that, you and I sit here talking about wake up. There's a different level to waking up than to just waking to taking a red pill, right? There's levels to the game, and when we're talking 2020, that wasn't necessarily the case. I mean, to a degree, there were certain traps you could be caught in, like we were talking about, just infinitely going down the abyss rabbit hole, and who knows where you end up. But now it's like, to define waking up to a lot of people, it's just like, oh, I see that the political system is a mess. I'm awake. It's like, well, the political system has always been a mess, regardless. So I mean, that's not a. I think there's a level of, like, they want us to. It's tough to. I always try and avoid a generalization per se, but like they want people to kind of be up in arms about it and be upset about it, because that's a frequency of fear. That's dissonance, right? And so they want people to be begging for a solution, a savior. And so then you introduce technology, you introduce robots, you introduce all these things, efficiency, which is what machine operate on is efficiency. So it's like, oh, here's your solution. When the solution really is just within ourselves, and it's about an internal revolution of our consciousness and the higher frequencies that we can
And
tap into.
connecting with other people
Hmm.
in a more deep, profound way
Yeah.
is something that will help you.
Hmm.
I feel like they want everyone to be alone with their goggles and their robot to fold the laundry and do the chores.
Hmm.
That's what I feel is ultimately the goal, whether they're saying that or not. That's what I feel. I feel like the goal is ultimate disconnection.
Hmm.
So to fight that is to go into connection. And so to connect people to still go to the grocery store, go to yoga class, go, be around people. I actually feel like that was it was very profound to me when they did the lockdowns and my yoga studio closed. And I just immediately drew the connection. They didn't want us doing yoga in this proximity because I used to do yoga class with like 100 people in a room. It was a
Hmm.
packed class, and raising the vibration was a very obvious factor being in there, and they did not want that. And so I feel like it's maintaining that feeling despite the attempts of more further disconnection.
Definitely. And I would say connection is sort of the key to fifth dimensional consciousness and to actually awakening into 5D because it's a lot of the spiritual work in the developments that we're talking about. It can be very easily um, put into, and I know we talked about this on a previous podcast, it's very easy to put it in the perspective of hermit mode. It's very easy to, and there's a time and place, like I was telling you about. I went on my 10 days of silence to meditate, and, but even there were still levels of connection that were unspoken that were being um, forged. It was energy, and that's what true connection is, energy. And so the key to actually stepping into that fifth dimensional consciousness, it is the recognition of our oneness and our unity and feeding into that directly and to build community and to build connection and to actually build that together, right? I mean, we if we isolate ourselves in our bedroom just meditating all day and attempting to align our chakras and we're not out in the community at all and we're total hermits, well, you could make the argument, what's the difference between somebody doing that and somebody who's totally disconnected and having the robot fold their laundry, right? And
Yeah,
they're just watching the screen all day.
it's two ends of the same spiritual spectrum, I guess.
Hmm.
It's like, right. So you don't, because I talk a lot, sometimes I talk a lot about this false spiritual matrix as well, which is crumbling. So there's this way of being spiritual and the spiritual aesthetic that also is not where I feel like we are going
Hmm.
because you want to be authentic and you want to be creative and you want to be expressing yourself, and it doesn't have to look spiritual because having it fit into the spiritual box is another matrix.
Hmm.
So you can be, because I find, and I have a friend who talks a lot about this too. The most awakened person is probably the garbage collector who is a very awakened and enlightened and doing their job and not in your face talking about it like a guru on a mountaintop. It's like he's just doing whatever he wants to do as an awakened soul. And so you do whatever you want as an awakened soul. That's bringing a level of authenticity to you and not keeping you limited in a false spiritual matrix.
Hmm.
Because I feel like it's, if I'm not going to a Joe Dispenza conference and or a Tony Robbins event, um, I'm not spiritual or something, or I've got to keep going on uh, retreats, or I have to go on, I have to do a sound bath on a new moon, and that's how spiritual I am. It's like you don't have to do any of that because that's keeping you. I blame Oprah for this, by the way, because I feel like that was the purpose of Oprah. That's another rabbit hole, but that's my feeling is that she had people believing spirituality was Eckhart Tolle and all of this. I mean, we've been fed a spiritual matrix program, and that's another rabbit hole. So,
Hmm.
yeah, excessive meditation, excessive, does it make you happier? I would just ask yourself that,
Hmm.
because it's whatever makes you happy. If it makes you happy to go, to me, it's more connecting to nature and connecting to other people than it is about, am I meditating and praying enough?
Hmm. Definitely. You know, it's funny. It reminds me of a meme that I always really liked and I thought was funny that it's like the spirituality starter packs versus the advanced pack. The spirituality starter pack, you have the chakra balancing, you have all those things that you just talked about on that beginner pack side. And then it says spirituality advanced pack. It's just a dude holding a coffee and a cigarette. He's just, and
Yeah,
so it's
that's
yeah.
the more truthful path, is how it feels, and we've reached that level, I feel, of awareness about it.
I definitely agree with you because, there's a time and a place for all of those things that you mentioned, right? Somebody like Eckhart Tolle, I think does good work. I think he himself is a very enlightened, aware being. But when you're making, I don't know, you're making your spirituality founded upon it, because there's really an outsourcing that goes on when we rely upon all of these external methods to be whole and to be spiritual. In theory, I should be able to go a month without meditating and be just fine and be just as spiritual. And because I am, nothing has changed. I mean, maybe, may- maybe on a few days I'm a little bit more uh, less patient or a little more quick tempered if I don't meditate every day. Okay, or I'm not practicing a meditation because it does benefit me personally. That doesn't make me less spiritual or we attach our spiritual identity to so many of these external methods. And I think Ram Dass has talked a lot about that actually. And something I appreciate about him is, the methods themselves become the trap. As soon as you become reliant upon the method, you are no longer using the method properly. Maybe it's time to let go of the method, and find the spirituality through a new method or through a new way, because you're going to find that regardless of the method that you choose, it's going to lead you to the same place, and that's yourself, and that's your own spirituality. But if we're too attached externally, you almost lose the entire purpose of it, and it creates a new matrix, like you described.
It's really about becoming more the creator. I think you said creator of your reality at one
Hmm.
point, but it is that feeling of, if you're really getting the codes that want to come through to activate you, you will start to operate differently. You will start to create your own reality. You will not need or be reliant upon an external matrix or an external system. So
Hmm.
what they want is to keep that from happening at all costs. Like, they don't want people exiting the program, like, and becoming a creator being, that doesn't need to be reliant on the program. And I still pay taxes, and so I'm not escaped from the program either. But I
Hmm.
feel like, there is a level I have of independence in my life and abundance that comes in because I tapped into this frequency that I couldn't tap into before. So there are moments in my life where I was in survival mode, working jobs that I hated, not getting by, feeling like being in a lot of debt, all of this. And I feel like once my Kundalini was activated, once I started accessing these codes, once I started using my voice, once I started using my throat chakra, channeling, doing videos, whatever I started doing that I was guided to do because it felt like my creative expression, um, and divine gifts, it it has allowed for this level of independence from the program. So I feel like that is what we want for everyone. I mean, that's what I
Hmm.
feel like most people would want if they knew that it was possible. But most people won't even let themselves go there to believe that that is possible. But it is.
Right. Definitely. Well, and I think a lot of people's 3D identities are just attached to the program itself. So this level of sovereignty that you're speaking to, it's almost not even, and maybe this is a generalization and putting words into uh, to define other people, but I was at a point for this for myself where the idea of sovereignty didn't necessarily mean detaching from the program, right? I didn't know anything but the program and the way of life within the actual matrix and the actual system, right? But like you just described, once you have an awareness of, oh, I am a being that exists outside of this program, outside of this matrix, I'm going to define myself by that, right? And then everything that you do has with it that if you're grounded in that, there's a level of beauty that comes from it and joy and just in the day to day, regardless of the actions that we're taking, because they're consciously empowered as sovereign beings instead of fighting to survive. And I still pay taxes too. I don't like that I pay taxes. I don't necessarily believe in those taxes, but maybe that's a part of the program that can go away at some point. Um, but the fact that I'm paying taxes doesn't define that, oh, I'm a slave to the matrix. I'm a slave to the system. Really, I think that enslavement, the only thing that can enslave us is ourselves. There's nothing that can actually truly enslave us but our own inability to comprehend the full totality of who we are. Because once we unlock the totality of who we are and recognize it, well, we have the choice now. And then, I mean, if we're going to continue to, I think once we unlock it, enslavement goes out the window. It's not really even an option anymore. But we recognize we're the ones doing the enslavement ourselves. There isn't anything that can truly externally um, take that away from us. And I think that's what that lack of recognition on that is really what people fear most because they think the keys to their freedom fall somewhere outside of themselves. Place them on the spectrum wherever you will. Blame this thing, this thing, this thing, this thing. When the reality is, none of those things are the ultimate beholders of freedom, if you will.
Yeah. The biggest block though, if this is something that feels like you can't quite like everything makes sense, everything you're connecting to all of it's that what we're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
but this piece is blocked, I would look at the personal relationships and connections in your inner circle in your life because it's very difficult to access this, to command this reality if you are every day living with someone who sees and operates at a matrix frequency.
Mm-hmm.
So it's that lack of being in the same vibration with who's in your actual physical environment that might be keeping this from manifesting more directly because their energy is blocking it.
Mm-hmm. Right. If somebody, whether it's I guess, an intimate relationship or close friends, family, I think all of us have had that experience to where we want to be on one level. Another person is, let's say, over here, and we can very easily, to appease that relationship, to prevent hardship or prevent struggle or prevent the unthinkable of terminating a relationship or ending it for the benefit of ourselves, really, and our own ascension process. We just kind of live and let it be. But I really do think that, and speaking from experience, that does bring down our frequency. It does prevent us from actually becoming who we are meant to be and unlocking that full totality because we get comfortable in the relationship and we start to become we really are the people we spend our time with the most, right? And so if we're not surrounded by it, well, it almost feels like an impossibility. And I think the really difficult thing is when somebody feels like there's not a single person in their life who is on that path, right?
Right.
And then I think there's a lot of people out there in that exact situation where maybe they engage with these ideas, but every single person they've connected with about it is online or it's some or seeing somebody like you on YouTube or this podcast or whatever it may be.
It's like a paradox as well, but my feeling is taking you don't have to leave their presence completely, but
Mm,
it's so that you don't lose yourself in the relationship or with the person. Take time away from them, take time for yourself, and then go back, uh, be around them if you can not like lose yourself in that connection. Maintaining your sovereignty, in other words, without compromising
mm,
to their energy. So it's a really, you have to be very present. You have to be really present to do this, and really like very, very aware of when you might be losing yourself and when you're not. But it's a balance. That's what
mm,
I'm being shown. It's just like a balance so that you don't isolate yourself fully, so that you don't have no one, because that is true that a lot of times people don't think anyone's on your frequency. And mostly it's because you're the one planting seeds, you're the blue flame, like you're the contagious frequency that's helping others activate and awaken at this point.
mm,
So you are doing that without maybe even knowing it. And then if you think of how much time it took you to awaken, it's going to take them probably the same amount of time if they're going to awaken at all. But I feel like you wouldn't be placed in anyone's life if they weren't on some level, maybe subconsciously to them, wanting to awaken.
mm. Right.
So because they're drawn to you for a reason, and that these feel like I'm getting a lot of kingdom spouse energy. That's what I've been calling it, because it's definitely, it's not a twin flame connection that feels like that activates your higher self, but it's someone who you have a lot of past life experience with and future life experience with, but you're like called into contract with them for a reason. So you're pulled together for something bigger than what you may even be able to comprehend. Because I don't feel like they're not going to pull an awakened soul out of your hermit mode to go into relationship with anyone for no reason. It's
Mm,
like you're gonna be sent in exactly who is meant for you, and that's your lesson. That's your work. That's your, so that's why I call it kingdom spouse, because at this level of being activated, you have work to do with whoever is sent to you, and it's going to be a big deal. It's not going to
mm,
be a karmic relationship. It's not going to be something where, because I define karmic relationships as both of you being kind of unconscious and both of you playing out unconscious lessons and ancestral patterns and wounds that need to be kept alive, you could say. It's not an easy feeling, but when two people are asleep and
mm,
they're in a relationship versus people who are awakened in a relationship, or one person awakened with someone who's awakening, because that's what I'm getting is the feeling now.
definitely. And the I pulled a tarot on this idea fairly recently in this energy, and for myself, it's like kind of standing almost in the emperor energy for me in a lot of ways. It's like you look at that, and I heard a interesting, I don't remember what I was listening to. It was some sort of lecture podcast. They were talking about like the awakened soul knows where to go in terms of, let's say, conversation, or knows where to go with each individual person, right? There's almost an intuitive knowing, like, okay, I can have these conversations. I can go here and I can give this energy and this and this, and it's actually going to be exactly what this person needs. I know in 2020 there was a big like, and I felt guilty to this in some ways too. It's like I want to share with everybody what I'm learning. I want everybody to know, wow, I'm seeing this, 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 and this. I want to awaken everybody at rapid speed. Let me share all of this. Right. And that most of the time there's going to be pushback. There's going to be almost a negative response. And, there's a lot of people who would say, why are they not seeing this? Why are they not responding? Why are they upset when I send this, when I send this, when I talk about this? Right. And it's like, well, to truly awaken is to recognize where you can go with those people, but then also do what you were talking about earlier, where you respond with energy and you communicate based off of energy. So, it's not always about what you say or what they say. It's about the energy exchange that's involved. And that's what's going to bring about the true growth, right? If somebody's words don't align with the energy behind it, respond to the energy. Respond to what you intuitively know, like you're talking about. And maybe that's going to be confusing to the other person, but it's part of their lesson. It's part of their growth, right? In the same way that people come into our lives for particular lessons and particular growth and how whatever it may be, it's kind of vice versa the same thing. We're in people's lives for a reason. And if we hold back our own authentic energy and expression, we're doing them a disservice, right? Even if something feels um, they might perceive this to be a bit harsh or be a bit over the top, but this is what I know I need to say. I'm doing them a disservice when I don't express that, because then they're not going to grow. They're going to somebody else will come in and they'll have to repeat that same thing. When in reality, we can grow together right now, even if it's not in a rainbow and butterfly sense, right? you know.
No,
Um,
and it's funny because in my personal relationship as a channeler, a lot of things that I say are very triggering to
mhm,
him. And it's like, well, I don't intend that to trigger you or upset you, but I also can't not at this point I am unfiltered.
mhm,
Fully unfiltered person. But at some point, I think that there's a mechanism most people have where they don't speak everything they think, but I
mhm,
don't. I do the opposite. It just flows. It flows. So if you are also someone who is very activated to speak, because a lot of the clair abilities are clear audience, but maybe that's the wrong way to say it. But the feeling is that you're speaking a lot that you may not even know is what the other person needs to hear or needs to come through you or something. And so, right, I would say that's a factor, is not to limit yourself, not to um, feel like you're saying things that are wrong or that are hurtful or that are triggering to anyone, because it is actually possibly a divine gift that you're shifting the energy with your words.
mhm. Right, definitely. And it's very, we all know the difference between when something is coming in from a place of authenticity versus when we just lose our cool or temper, and then maybe we trigger somebody because we were just angry ourselves, and then that's a whole different ballgame. But what we're speaking to is when we know we need to say something or we know something is the truth, and there's that direct call to let me express this, we kind of have to, right? We kind of have to share that. And I think that's whether it's in the form of a direct conversation or, I know there's a lot of people who kind of have a hesitancy for, let's say, social media or starting a creative project or writing or podcasting, whatever it may be. If there's that inkling to let me explore this or let me say this, let me bring it out, it's like, all right, I'm going to do the world a disservice if I don't do it. And, there's a kind of a responsibility, a sense of responsibility that you gain from that once you start to embody that actual mindset and take it on as a personal responsibility, because it is a responsibility. I definitely live with that. And if I'm silencing myself when I know I need to speak, at the end of the day, I'm like, wow, I really messed that one up. I really need to speak more. I really should have said this or this and this. And so it's kind of a learning game in that way. But
That's true. And I do feel like you'll know. It can manifest as anxiety. It can manifest as different. I used to, prior to starting doing messages
mm,
all the time, I would have a physical buildup in my body of what felt like anxiety, because the energy needed to move out and needed to flow and needed to come out into the earth. And so you might feel that if that's something, because I get a lot of people who um, do readings and one-on-one readings, who want to start a podcast, who want to start a YouTube channel. And there is this feeling of being very extroverted, feeling of being very seen. That's a repeating message for the wave that feels like awakened souls need to be seen. So it is the age of
Mm-hmm.
Aquarius. It's like you have to almost fight harder for your voice and your messages to be even heard by anybody. So you have to be overly ambitious, you could say, or overly extroverted. There's this feeling of that. And I was always a very quiet person. My throat chakra was very weakened because I was not really allowed to speak as a child. So I shut down. And I remember going to Shakespeare and Company as an actress when I was 20 years old. And they actually had me do an exercise where I had to yell for 3 days. They said, Laura, you don't speak quietly. We can't, or you speak too quietly, nobody can hear you. And they said when you're yelling, you're actually speaking at regular volume.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because I didn't realize I was that quiet. So for me to now have this calling, whatever you want to call it, that I speak for a living is really comical and funny. But from where I came from, it was almost like the Matrix knows your divine gift and tries to suppress it from
Mm-hmm.
like early on. So it's interesting to me that my voice was so suppressed, and I've had to overcome that specific wound because it's so connected to my gift. But that feels like whatever it is for you, if you feel like you're not meant to be seen, or there's this push pull with what you want to do versus what you feel comfortable doing, it's probably because you're really meant to do it and you're
Mm-hmm.
really meant to overcome the wounding around that.
Right. It's like what we fear most is probably what we need most in a sense. And I'm right there with you. I was actually very quiet. I still am very reserved in a lot of ways. I'm naturally a little bit more introverted. So I was also very quiet in school growing up. People spoke to me. I had no problem being social and whatnot. And I had my elements of being a social person. But generally speaking, didn't want any attention, wanted to just sort of exist in the background, don't want to put myself out there. Oh, I'm very content being in, just in the background. Don't put me up front. And now here I am with a podcast and, putting myself out online and have no problem speaking. And, it's almost taking on like the, it's weird. It's like there's certain elements of like leadership roles that now I just sort of step right into. And me growing up, or me even just 7 or 8 years ago, I'd be like, oh my gosh, absolutely not. Like there's no way, right? And
Right.
it was just a natural I would say suppression that happened when I was growing. And it's tough to even pinpoint exactly what it was, but I recognize the energy that um behind that suppression. And so kind of bursting that bubble, if you will, it took time. It took continually going right into the points of, well, where do I feel afraid to do? Like the podcast that was a big deal because I'm like, wow, I'm going to put myself online. I'm going to speak online. I'm going to talk about things. That's crazy. But actually starting doing it just started flowing naturally and naturally and naturally. I'm like, okay, this makes sense. And so it kind of actually, in a way, starting the podcast is what kind of broke that cycle of being in the background because I had to
Right.
put myself out there. And so and then now it comes naturally. But you're right, our gifts are suppressed in that way. And but we always have that calling, that inkling, like, oh, I feel like I need to do this. I need to do this. And it's, you know,
Mhm.
even something like podcasting or social media, whatever it be, obviously you want it to be successful. You want all these metrics, whatever it is. The real success in it is the actual breaking of the old patterns. It's the actual stepping into our authenticity in the growth that comes from these, um, you can say creative projects, but these authentic forms of expression, right? When we truly own our voice and we truly own our authentic being, like that's the real gift. That's the real win that we get from doing it from anything, because that's
Yeah.
what snowballs into something much larger than we can even begin to comprehend on the rational mind, you know, with the seeds that we're planting, with the ideas that we're generating, with the energy that we're sharing, you know,
Mhm.
the I would say impact of that. Like if we have a little bird's eye view of our impact from that, I think we'd all be astounded by the ripple effects that it has to create this more of a 5D collective consciousness, which I do think is I don't want to say an inevitability, but an awakening to it is happening. So I think it's only a matter of time before a lot of us are living in that reality with all of the people around us, um, at least on I'd say a majority level, or it's something that is more of a norm.
It's like, yeah, it's like letting your higher self run the show and not your identity, your old
Hmm.
matrix identity. So it's shifting your avatar to be more aligned with your higher self. And it's really, I just use this as an example because I wanted, it's like on some level, I wanted to act. I wanted to be an actress. So I wanted to be seen and heard, but I didn't want to be myself. I wanted to still
Mm.
have character. I wanted to still have a mask. But I wanted to be seen and heard. There was this desire. And and I did that for 20 years. I did that for a very long time. I mean, maybe longer. I started when I was 6 years old doing musical theater and all that. But
Hmm.
I didn't it didn't click for me until I started showing up as actually me. And then everything clicked. So whatever it is, I use that as an example because I being seen and heard is a common denominator, I feel, for all of us that are on this wave. But whatever it is that's keeping you from being fully authentic and seen and heard is the missing piece that has to shift. So like
Hmm.
for me, it was acting. It was like, okay, but I'm not going to be a character. I'm not going to have that crutch to lean on. I'm going to be myself. And that might be like the scariest thing for people is to be themselves and feel like that's enough. But that is actually enough. And that is what people are craving so desperately is be yourself without hiding, without a crutch, without a gimmick or whatever it might be.
Mm, definitely. And it's interesting because that just the idea of being ourselves, it's like that idea can be so thrown around, like it's almost becomes like cliche to say, "Oh yeah, be yourself, be who you're meant to be." But that is the best gift that we can ever actually embody and use and express, right? And we don't need to lean on these personas and these masks and this because we all have like a shield that we place up around ourselves of our own authenticity that's programmed into us. And it's like, what are the things that are actually building the foundation to that shield, to that wall? Like, where are we
Well,
placing our armor?
and you could say a lot of it too is not wanting to be disliked or not
Hmm.
wanting to reveal a side of yourself that looks messy or looks um, angry or looks unlikable, whatever that might be. So I feel like when you lose the desire to be liked and
Hmm.
accepted by everyone, you're going to be closer to being your authentic self.
Right, definitely. That was a big one for me, and I think it took through a trial of fire in a sense of being disliked and having pushback and being like, wait a minute, what is going on? I'm not
Right.
trying to be mean.
It's funny because it's polarizing. When you
Hmm.
tap into the frequency, you will notice that as
Hmm.
a result. So
Right,
you're on the right path when
right.
that happens.
At this point, I have no desire to be liked or desire to be validated for my ideas and well, I won't say that. There is still, because there are still some things actually where it's like, okay, like podcasting, for example. If let's say I go into a deep, deep rabbit hole, right? And, every once in a while, I'll still explore some of those darker areas, but it's more of like I'm coming from my own space of authenticity. So, right, let's look at some of the deeper truths in the matrix. There are certain things where it's like I still question, oh, I don't know what people are going to think about this one, right? So that desire to be liked is still a little bit there, and I don't know if we ever truly get rid of the desire because there's a tribal impulse that we kind of all have, right? Where we are communal beings, so we do want to be accepted. Um, but now I've learned to just kind of power through it, and I'm like, whatever. People will take it as they will. I know that the true people in my life and the people that I've built a foundation of unconditional love with, and there's a few people who are in my life like that, those people will still be there. And that's what matters. The ones I'm truly building community with, the ones I'm truly growing with, and regardless of what the Matrix does or says or whatnot, all right, we're good. I'll be all right. So even now, there's I think that desire to be liked. It's a tough thing to overcome because I don't know if it's ever truly gone, but you almost need to be willing to be like, whatever. It's all just an identity. It's all just a game, anyways. Like, so what if people don't like they don't like Evan McDermott? Well, Evan McDermott's just an idea. Once they meet me at the soul level, they'll be fine. We'll be good, you know?
It's usually because you're just reflecting something in them that they don't like about themselves
Hmm.
anyway.
Right.
So I
Exactly.
look at it like that. It's projection.
Right. And people will always project in certain ways and whatnot if they're living unconsciously. And, I notice for myself too, if I have a natural, like, there's a difference between reading and, like, if I read the energy of somebody and I get something that feels a bit off, I usually still go through the methods of, like, all right, is this just something within me that's feeling triggered, right? I don't want to just say, I intuitively don't like this person, for the X, Y, and Z. Is there something intuitively that there might be something I'm intuitively picking up in this person that is dark in their field or is dark, like there's a bit of darkness, but is that a reflection of me? Am I projecting my own triggers or wounds based upon what I'm seeing in the other person? Right. And so it goes both ways to where, I'm not quick to write somebody off per se just because I get an initial feeling that's a kind of I don't know, something just feels off, right? I'll read into it, I'll keep it in mind, and I'll see if it's my own projections just being placed onto another person because I've been wrong before, right? My initial worries or feelings of something off, it just was my own wounds, it was my own triggers. I'm like, oh, I see now, right? So I think we do need to have that self evaluation too for projection and looking at how we're reading other people and reading the room and reading the collective.
Mhm. And that's a very ascended way of looking at it, what you just
Mm,
said. And I feel like that is where we're getting to, because when you realize it is a simulation and you're in your own reality, right? The other person's reflecting an unintegrated part of yourself in some way,
mm,
typically. And then you also probably have to have a awareness of Agent Smith's awareness of like when you've hit up against a matrix parameter, you could say. There's like this feeling of I'm pushing against a matrix parameter, and what are the consequences of that going to be versus am I going to upset someone? Are they going to dislike me? Because
mm,
there's different energies running. I sometimes get that where I'm getting a message or I'm getting something to say, and I know it's going to hit against a matrix parameter.
mm,
And that gives me pause more than anything. Typically, it's like I don't care if people are offended by what I have to say, but if I'm gonna hit against a very significant level of programming, I do feel like I want to hold back and not share. So sometimes like things will come through months after the initial download came through, but
mm,
I just wasn't comfortable to share it yet.
mm.
So that's just me personally. That happens sometimes.
Right, definitely. And I agree with you on that. And it's kind of like going back to that idea, like the awakened person knows exactly what to say to the person at the right time. Like if, maybe there's a matrix parameter, you're having a conversation with somebody one on one, and you come up against something that's major, major, major programming, and we only know how to express it in one particular way. Maybe we're not meant to share it in that moment, but then the download comes in later on to where it's like, oh, this is how I'm able to articulate this to where it kind of skirts the parameter a little bit and is actually able to articulate this idea in a deeper way, right? So,
And and I will say too, it comes through typically as comedy and
mm,
humor, and it doesn't come through so serious. It doesn't come through so jarring.
hmm,
So I'm a lot of times I'm guided to use humor because of the Pleiadian connection, probably, but to use humor because it is basically an absurdity that all of this is even like what it is
Hmm.
basically absurd. So I just match the frequency with, I mean, it is kind of funny, Joe Rogan and the dragons. It's
Hmm.
like that is funny. So there's a sense of levity. I'm pretty much always guided to use levity because that also really, the reptilians don't like that very much with
Yeah.
whatever's left of them, because I feel like they've shifted. Now they're the AI, Mars
Hmm. Right.
distorted timeline. But anyway, that they don't like to be laughed at.
Right. Well, I think that's the most beautiful form of expression that there is, the sense of laughter and community and comedy, because right, if you can like sit there and laugh at something that is so like dark and horrific or whatever it may be, and you could look at examples in let's say history. I love terrible jokes of things that are probably off limits for a lot of people. I find it funny, but it's because it takes the energy that surrounds something and actually it allows you to process it, allows you to digest it, it allows you to like, oh, okay, I can sit in this and we can share a laugh, but it doesn't necessarily take away from the true meaning of something, but it allows things to be more processed, allows things to be more digestible for people. And, I think that's why there's a big, if you look at comedy in the modern age, it's not as you see people the Matrix comes after comedians who go on certain subjects or say certain things or joke about certain things because it's like, oh, that's going to wake people that's going to allow people to like process that in a way they're not supposed to, or going to wake people up to a deeper level of truth within that, right? And
George
so
Carlin.
George Carlin, a perfect example of that. George Carlin, oh, I'm blanking on the other guy's name right now. He passed away many years ago too. Um, he looks, you know who he looks like? He looks like Alex Jones, and I'm blanking on his name. Um, he looks exactly the same. He looks like a young Alex Jones, but
Uh,
he had similar ideas, and if anything, I'd say he was very, spiritual. Like if anything, went into the spirituality more so than George Carlin even did, but the same type of ideas, right? And so I'm gonna remember his name like after we hop up on the podcast. I'm gonna feel really.
long, is it a funny last name, like a long, funny last name that he
I don't.
has?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I
I'm
thought
not
it was
sure.
I thought it was a short name, but I
Okay.
and I shared one of his videos on Twitter like a week or two ago, and the fact that I already forgot his name is bad because it's somebody I've watched so many times. The fact I'm blanking on his name is the the unconscious brain has a way of working, I guess. But the same type of deal, right? So if you can laugh at things like that and you can actually talk about deeper levels of truth through the form of comedy, that's going to wake people up. That's going to and I always think that Ram Dass was kind of a comedian, the way he talked about certain spiritual truths and stories and whatnot. Because I'd sit there and I'd listen to his lectures and I'd find myself laughing. I'd be like, this dude's funny. Like he should be doing stand-up comedy, you know?
That's true. And I feel like when it comes through, the person doesn't take themselves so seriously,
Hmm.
then the message can come through in a more pure way. Because you can kind of tell when people are not able to laugh at themselves or not be so serious. And
Hmm.
it kind of it keeps you at a distance from the message itself, because there's a sense of like, okay, I have to be in a certain energy to receive the serious download or the serious message from this person, versus um dropping that guard, dropping that barrier,
Hmm.
and just being real.
Right.
It's really, I feel like comedians too have done shadow work,
Yeah.
because you're basically telling you all of the most um the things you would never speak to anyone out loud. So comedians typically lead with their shadow, and that's what makes them so interesting and funny anyway, because it's like taboo in a sense.
Hmm.
Um, and I feel like that's also a level of authenticity that we're trying to get to, is
Right.
nothing's off limits.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Definitely. And I think
With your shadow, in terms of your shadow, like what you feel is what you would keep a secret from anyone.
hmm
You actually lead with that. And when you lead with that, you become really powerful.
Right, definitely. And I think if we can go into our there first has to be, like you're talking about, the shadow work where we go into ourselves. We look at the what are the things I keep hidden from myself? What are the things that there's a sense of um I guess people, there's a sense of shame or abound because maybe it doesn't uphold the particular identity or the particular way I want to express myself or, whatever it may be, right? And if we can lead with that and we can do the shadow work, we can share it, we can be authentic, well, then it just opens up the gates for everything else, right? And it allows you to actually experience unconditional love because, right, if you love someone unconditionally, then regardless of whatever shadows, whatever things are present, the love is still there, right? As soon as you place the, oh, but you did this once, oh no, not love you anymore. That's conditional love, right? In the pure sense of the word, because you're placing conditions upon it. So I think the only way to actually even enter into 5D consciousness and to go into the heart space is to go into those shadows, go into those secrets, go into whatever it is that we feel a sense of eeriness about within ourselves, and then approach it from a place of love and openness and vulnerability, transparency, whatever it may be. And that can be individually, it starts individually, but then that extends to what we see in the world and what we see in others, and kind of going with that nothing is off limits type of a mindset, because love has no limits. And if I'm acting from a space of love, well, wherever I feel called to go, then that's probably where I should go, because then I'm placing a barrier on it if I say otherwise.
And I have another friend too who did this YouTube video on Gomez and Morticia Adams, that
Mm,
they're actually the most truest love story couple because they are leading with their shadows. And
mm,
it's that's actually a good representation because I use them a lot. I post memes of them.
mm,
But it's true because that's the most authentic is the ones that are not, it's not love and light and a bubble, and it's really deep, secretive, unpleasant, but they love each other. Um,
mm.
Connection.
Right. And would you say, like, going into, because ideally somebody listens to this podcast, they're going to want to go and live in the space of the fifth dimension, right? That's the name of the podcast, the fifth dimension. So we want to embody fifth dimensional consciousness and awareness. Is the requirement to embody this space is to go into the shadow, it's to embrace the shadow. And once you're in this, let's say, space of awareness, something I always try to remind myself and bring up is it isn't always the love and light. We still see, let's say, chaos or disruption, or we see the darkness, but from what I've experienced, it just means we're better able to approach it from a space of love, from a place of acceptance, in the sense of maybe I don't agree with whatever I see, but I can accept that it's there. I see it. Okay. And to me, that is the true embodiment of the fifth dimension, where, you have those beautiful moments of love and light, don't get me wrong, and they multiply the more you actually start going down this path. It's not all darkness, but you still see things for what it is. You still see, oh, I still see the AI, the black goo takeover over here, but
Yeah.
that's not my reality. So it's like that shadow work, I think, is still heavily involved in actually in an ascension process, when I think a lot of times we relegate the shadows to like this, or at least I think the false spiritual paradigm relegates the shadows to this, like, there's a reason people will call tarot work of the devil, or things like kundalini. Oh man, that's Satan worshiping, whatever it may be. We've heard
All
these
right. Yeah.
we've heard these crazy things. um but I think it's because those things reveal the shadow. They reveal the things that are hidden in nature. um and ultimately, at the end of the day, in order to actually ascend, we have to step into the darkness in ways.
Right. And I feel like going into the fifth dimension in a broader sense is becoming multidimensional.
Mm.
and being able to traverse the dimensions or being like the observer. I mean, from a fifth dimension perspective, you can observe the 3D, you can observe the fourth dimension, you can access even higher than fifth dimension energy, but it's that fifth dimension is the heart opening space of unconditional love where there's nothing you can tell me. It's the closest I guess you could say to a feeling of a parent child where you love your child unconditionally no matter what they might do. But you start to develop that for humanity. You start to develop that for everyone, and operate at that awareness level. So being at that awareness, you're gonna be aware of a lot of things and a lot of darkness and light. And so being fifth dimensional is being just open to all of it and being aware of all of it. And I feel like you can't bypass your way into fifth dimension and not experience anything that you don't want to. That's the shadow.
Mm-hmm.
Have to
Definitely.
integrate that. And I feel like a lot of us too are very heavily initiated, like the ancient gods and goddesses, to traverse the underworld and then come out the other side of it with all of that we learn. And so if you're going through a difficult time as an awakened soul, it's probably an initiation because that's what I've been getting in the messages lately is a lot of initiation energies. Like I pull cards on the channel and I feel like I've gotten the initiation card
Mm.
every single video for the last month. So
Mm.
that's and in different decks. So it's definitely a repetitive theme that feels like because we're now Pluto is in Aquarius, but it's just been in for a few weeks. So we're integrating this at a really high level. It might feel like darkest before the dawn type of feeling. That and then once we get into Aquarius season next year, January, February, it feels like everything's going to get a lot brighter, more hopeful. I'm seeing there's going to be a lot of very chaotic events and very strange events in the early part of the year to kind of try to trip you up and confuse you, but of just look at it as part of the game
Mm.
and
Right.
not take it all so seriously. So we have to stay in a more high vibrational energy no matter what might be going on in the 3D reality.
Right. And I definitely agree with you in that same idea of this time being an initiation. I almost look back at the last couple of years too. It feels like this ending of Pluto being in Capricorn, like it's like the endings into a beginning. Like realistically, I view it as the same energy, an ending and a beginning, right? Because one feeds into the other. It almost feels like we've been on this path of initiation for ourselves, humanity at large, to sort of choose our next path, right? And for some people, that's going to be a, I don't want to say a descent into the 3D or the darkness, but we kind of talked about some of the ways people might live and outsource their authenticity. There's an initiation into that, or it's an initiation into this higher plane, into fifth dimensional consciousness, right? And I think that,
Energy.
yeah, yeah, I think that initiation, that that phase, we might still be in that, but before long, I think we'll have this. One day we'll feel when that shift has completed in a sense, and we'll just kind of know, right? We're still kind of gearing up. We're still kind of getting there. There's going to be more trials. There's going to be more steps, if you will. But the initiation energy does feel really strong to where it almost feels like we're about to be, we've been stepping into the fire to train ourselves, and all right, here we go. Here we go. Next, it's here.
Yeah.
So, and I feel like we are closing in on that in a lot of ways, where that next era that we've been preparing for, well,
Mhm.
here it comes. It's right around the corner.
Right. It's a huge shift.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and I feel it. I feel it. It's beautiful that I think we're arriving into it because this is hopefully we were talking about man being on the path of de-evolution. I think that's how you would say that word.
Mhm.
I think we're kind of,
Now shifting.
yeah, I think we're shifting back into a more evolved path, an evolved timeline in a lot of ways. And that's evident just in the growth I've seen within myself, the people I've been connecting with, like you, like yourself, and I'm sure the people you're connecting with. And so, if I feel like I'm evolving, then how is mankind not evolving, right?
It's a reflection, exactly. And it is a accessing of your gifts.
Hmm.
So you could feel, because I feel like we had to be very highly aware of our gifts. It's like going to school. It's like the X-Men going to school and realizing what gifts they have and then being let out into the world to use them. But there's been this period of time where you've had to hone your skills, you could say, or hone your gifts and really truly know what you're here to do because we're moving into it's a technological age. It's very technological. It's very heavy. I mean, Aquarian energy is a lot of technology. It's a lot of conformity. It's a lot of human. It's opposite because you've got the conforming timeline. You've got everyone kind of automated and streamlined, and then you've got also very extreme creative expression and the star card and the tarot and the energy of the cosmos and becoming more galactic and becoming more realizing the technology is within you and it's not outside of you. But there's both because
Hmm.
that's the nature of the Aquarian age is that you've got a lot of both. So being able to be yourself at this time where you're being pulled to conform is that's why I feel like we've had to be initiated so that you know who you are, you know what your skills are, you know what your gifts are, and then you don't lose them in this pull to conform and give all of your energy into external technology.
Mm, definitely. And now we're stepping into our authenticity. It's the time for it.
Right.
So awesome. Well, Laura, we're almost at about 2 hours here. So I know we could keep going on and on and on about these. Like we could easily eclipse Joe Rogan's 3 hour podcast if we wanted to.
I thought about that. I don't know if I could do 3 hours on it. I guess you could,
Yeah.
but it's a lot.
It's
Yeah.
I've done, I think there's one guest I've had come on regularly. Um, and he just goes on like great conversations, but they average about 3.5 hours of length. But I really have to mentally prepare myself to get on that because I'm like, because I know it's going to be that long. Because,
Uh-huh.
it gets to a point like it's for me, the perfect length is always about, probably about 90 minutes, 2 hours, 3, 4 hours. They're doable, but it's like, wow, you really go deep with it. And, we easily could. Um, but, it feels like we're at a good stopping point or transition point. But I know there's more we can always discuss and uncover because the nature of this subject is infinite in itself, which is
I was
beautiful.
gonna say, it feels like if we did it, it would become a lot more cosmic and
Yeah,
ethereal.
100%, 100%. The podcast itself transcend. Um,
Yeah.
but Laura, do you have anywhere you'd like to send the listeners or anything that you're working on and want to share about? And just, any, I guess, wrap up thoughts or putting a
I
pretty
am
bow on things?
Yeah, well, I still offer one-on-one readings. I do that often, and I feel probably next year guided to do some in-person retreats because that's what we've been talking about is building
Mm-hmm.
community. So I'll keep everyone posted on that. I also have a Patreon that's more of a private community for 144,000. If you feel like you're a twin flame, a starseed, I get very specific messages for the Patreon that don't feel like they're for the masses. That's why they go there and they don't go to YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
But I have my YouTube channel. You can find me there. You can find me Twitter, Instagram, or X, or whatever we're calling it.
Yeah, X, I
And
guess. I still call it Twitter too.
call it Twitter. Okay. Right. And I am thinking about starting a clothing line as well. So that's something that feels like it's calling me because what I do is very, again, ethereal. It's videos, it's readings, and it kind of lives in the ether. And I've been wanting to do something tangible
Hmm.
and and practical. So I may do a dragon themed clothing line at some point. So we'll see.
I love it. I love it. I hope you do.
Mhm.
If you make men's clothing, I will certainly
Of
shop.
course, it'll be both. Yeah, for sure.
Love it. I love it. And we'll definitely plan on, what when you get your retreats going, I'd love to learn more about those when they happen. So we'll plan on having another podcast in the near future. And even when the ball starts rolling on a lot of these things too, and come on and share the updates, and we'll keep the conversations going. So,
Sounds good.
you know,
Okay,
always,
great.
always truly a pleasure to be able to chat, Laura. And I thank you again for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. And thank you to all the listeners for tuning into today's show. And we will see you on the next episode. Special thank you to Laura for coming on the Fifth Dimension. I'm really excited for all the work that she's got coming in the near future. She's always one to put out messages that are truly resonant and leading people into this fifth dimensional state of awareness that her and I were talking about. So be sure to check out her work, all of her social medias. She really is a gift of light to all of us in a world that can often feel quite chaotic. So, thank you to Laura for coming on, and I'm looking forward to the next podcast that her and I are going to do. And we were talking after the show. We're like, yeah, we could have kept going for hours. We are about to be getting into UFOs and motherships if we kept going. So there's a lot more to unpack and explore for sure. But if you're a fan of the show, be sure to subscribe. Head over to my Substack, mcdermott.substack.com, mcdermod.substack.com. You can also book a one-on-one tarot reading with me, whether it's live on Zoom or I send you a written tarot report. The links to book that, purchase it, is in the episode shown us below. Also, purchase a copy of my book, The Final Judgement Poetry Collection, right on Amazon. Link in the episode shown us below. Special thank you to our one and only official sponsor, Tranquil Desires of Chamberlain, South Dakota. It's going to wrap up this episode, ladies and gentlemen. I'll see you all next time. So long.